One other announcement, if I may, quickly before Larry talks. October 3rd, one of our other community partners, Women Thriving, is honoring our very own Chobe Hoy. In fact, she's everybody's Chobe Hoy. If anybody got to take a look at Brookline Hub this morning, Harvey wrote a very lovely tribute to Chobe about the fact that she is everybody's Chobe Hoy. And just to remind people, there is the gala to honor her on October 3rd. I know that Brookline Rotary has done a sponsorship of it, for which that organization is very grateful. Karen Jacobs, I believe, is one of the presenters. She's going to do the project that we do with Women Thriving, talk about it. There'll be lots of entertainment, and if you can, please get on their website and take a look at it.
I'd like to take the honor and the pleasure and the privilege of introducing Larry, since I was the one who brought up his name to be a speaker. And not only this, I've known Larry for many, many years. I'd say over 30 years, right, Larry?
Well, really about 15 years of really close contact, because I had you on that TV program.
That's true. And Larry is a local attorney. He practices general, and as he will tell you, he will take anything that walks in the door because he loves helping people. And Larry also he loves writing, and he wrote many books. One of them, American Jews, American Game, and the other is Voices of Brookline, which I'm in it, and also the memoirs.
I am too.
And also the memoirs that Larry will be talking about today. So, and Larry have a lovely, lovely wife. Rose I've known her also, and I wish she's joining with us today, but she didn't. So, Larry, take it on.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and I'll try and make this interesting. I was thinking about what I wanted to present first. Elias made reference to, I'm not really practicing law anymore. I gave that up maybe around 2000. Occasionally I do practice law on cases that come my way. One was when they wanted to put up a house next door, and that's a long story. I won't go into that now. I didn't take everything that came in the door, but I did never know what was going to happen any morning, because I was a general practitioner over here in Coolidge Corner. My office used to be in the SS Pierce Tower with those triple windows over there, and those were in my younger years. I'll be 90 on my next birthday, and they used to call me the king of Coolidge Corner. So I'm now averting phrases like kings, because we're dealing with somebody who wants to be king, but we won't get into politics. I think that the first thing I want to take up is actually, the first thing I want to do is show you Voices of Brookline. This is the book that Elias was referring to. I wrote that in 2005. And your Elias is a wonderful guy. He's one of the nicest people that I've ever met. And I was going over the story that I wrote about Elias. I'm going to take a few minutes on this. Here's the picture I took of Elias then. The same wonderful, smiling face. And he might have been a few years younger then, but optimism and being a good person keeps a person young, at least in most cases, not necessarily in mine, but certainly in Elias's. This is entitled Elias Audi, chairman of the Brookline Chamber of Commerce, immigrating from Lebanon and succeeding and ascending against all odds. Well, this is one of my favorite stories, because Elias came here and he settled, began his business in a town that is, in large part Jewish, and he succeeded to a fairly well. Now, how did he do that? Well, in my estimation, he did it because he has a spirit that is a spirit that we should have more of in the world. I'm not a big fan of writers reading from their books, and I'm not going to make a big deal about reading from this one, but I'm going to read you a few words that I put at the end of the story about how Elias, when he goes back to his home country, which he does from time to time, at least before these fraught times, I make a point to tell them, meaning his people in Lebanon, it came from a rotary, the feeling he has, what he projects, where 60% of the members are Jewish. That is how you bring people together. Show the good side of things. How do you think they feel when the Jews of Brookline contribute to a kitchen in Lebanon? In general, if things like this keep happening, and I'm quoting Elias, I think that brings peace and brings people together. Once you do the right thing, differences will disappear and people will come together. Would that such a spirit existed in all of us. You know, to end the program, I wrote this, the last sentence. Since we were both on, and I really was overcome with this feeling, you know, sitting there opposite Elias on this, you know, local TV program that I used to have, that I wanted to do this. To end the program, since we were both on camera, I said, I'm going to lean closer. I wanted to be closer to this fine man so that we can both shake hands. And we leaned forward and we did shake hands. And I ended the story by saying, perhaps a metaphor for peace. And Elias and I have lived that out ever since. I mean, we've never had a bad word together. We've had a lot of business. I've sent him some. I've had him do some for unfortunate friends. And I always wanted to do that because that's the kind of thing Elias does much better than I do, but I try and do it. And we see eye to eye on that stuff. So you have a great person in Elias. And I just wanted to say that. Now, as far as the...
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Elias. Still got that same great smile, right?
Larry, we didn't know.
So actually and by the way, I want you folks to interject anytime you want to. If you want to ask me a question, maybe, you know, we'll leave time for questions and answers, but ask me whatever you want. So then I think that Elias said, well, he wanted something on COVID-19. What have I been doing? I mean, you know that people my age are really in a dangerous situation because they really scared us at the beginning. And the stats are that people of this age who get it die. You know, and they put them on ventilators, and you know, the statistics were horrible. So you have to be very careful. And he wanted me to write about what I've been doing during COVID-19. Well, I think he can do a lot. What I did was write this memoir and I wrote it practically all since February. It's going to be about 400 odd pages with photographs and stuff like that. Once I began to dig into my past, I realized that, you know, people would say to me, well, you've led an interesting life. You ought to write a memoir. Well, I sort of shrugged that off. But then when this came along, COVID, I wanted to do something to use my time profitably. You might have seen the article about this in the tab about 5 or 6 weeks ago, where they wrote a very nice article about the stuff about my writing of the memoir. And the title of that memoir is, and if you can figure out what it means, maybe you'll tell me. No, I know, but it's I wanted something that would draw people in. And the title is Larry Ruttman, A Life Lived Backwards, an existential triad of friendship, maturation, and inquisitiveness. Well, first of all, let's take, I'll get back to that title in a second, but as far as what to do during COVID-19, as it said in that article, and as I'll say to you now, and as you probably know, there's lots of things you can do during COVID-19. Actually, it's a little bit of a blessing in disguise for people who like time alone, time to read, time to do whatever they do. For a writer, it's time to concentrate on the writing, with a lot of the things that take up our time during normal times not there, and you have to be at home and you have to find something to take up your time. And so everybody is interested in their family's history. Everybody, as I found in my writing career, which basically involves interviewing people, that everybody has a story to tell. Nobody is uninteresting. Everybody is interesting, and everybody can tell something that, if it's not commercially viable, it certainly can be interesting to their family, their friends, their associates, and can live on after them for their children, grandchildren, relatives, and so forth. So that I think anybody can find time to do that and would be interested in doing that. It's not a matter of being a professional writer, just a matter of being a human being and having memories about your own life. So that I would say busy yourself during COVID-19 with things like that. And you're doing something that is valuable and makes a contribution. As far as the title is concerned, yeah, I sort of lived my life backwards because even though I was a successful lawyer and did very well and had, I suppose, a pretty good reputation as a lawyer, I think that writing is, everybody tells lawyers stories. There's a lot of great lawyers. I mean, don't be tricked by all those bad lawyer stories, because lawyers are very important in our society and they help to keep the liberties that we have. I don't want to get into too much on that, but writing is something different. Everybody hates lawyers. Everybody loves authors. It's a different experience altogether. If you say you've written a book, they think you're something out of this world. Well, you're not really out of this world, because I think a lot. I never thought I could write a book, and it's not as hard as it may seem. If you've got something to say and you've had certain experiences, stick to what you know, and you can write a book. But so living my life backwards, so that I think that from the time I started to write a book, in about 2000, I think that was the beginning of the most important phase of my life. And it's still going on 20 years later at close to age 90. So in that sense, I'm living my life backwards. Also, when I say an existential triad of friendship, maturation, and inquisitiveness, well, it's existential because the three things in my life that have been terrifically meaningful are friendships. You've heard about one of them with Elias. Maturation, because I think that, maybe in midlife I was a little bit of a hypochondriac. Now I'm sort of a fatalist. I had melanoma last year. They cured that in a couple of operations, but instead of shrinking into the ground, I said, well, if they treat it and it's successful, I'll live, and if not, I'll die. So that, but fortunately, everything turned out okay. But I noticed that my attitude toward something existential like that was different than it was earlier in life. Inquisitiveness, they say it when I was a year and a half old. I used to go onto the blanket of other people at Nantasket Beach and ask why. And I never lost that. I've been asking why ever since, and I'm still asking why.
If you were getting under people's blankets, you're lucky you're alive.
No COVID at that time. And my mother and father would look for me, and I'd be over and, be talking to people, eating their food. And, I'm sort of a pain in the neck. And I think that I think that those three things have been existential for me, because without those and a good wife to take care of me, where would I be? Maybe not here. I think that those things and an optimistic view of life account in many ways that doctors don't understand about long life. And they can't really tell you with scientific accuracy what that's all about. But I do think that was, so that's sort of the idea of the title. As far as this book is concerned, that was published in, it's really quite a book. That's Hank Greenberg on the cover. And he was, as you know, in my mind, and in everybody's mind, the greatest Jewish player ever. I'll mention a few words as to him in a few seconds. But that book was, as it was about baseball, it was really a cultural history just as much. A cultural history of Jews going back to Depression times and even before. And the book is really about four things. It's about baseball, it's about American Jewish history, it's about American history, and it's about the individuals that I spoke to. Hank Greenberg, I think, was the only one at the time who had gone. I spoke to his son and Ralph Kiner, his lifelong friend, who was also a Hall of Fame player. And so it was a very interesting book. All the books I've done are interesting because I've talked to many, many famous people. Another one I mentioned is the book about classical music. I've spoken to world-class people like John Harbison and the up-and-coming Matthew O'Coin and Sophie Moutir up at, people like that. And it's all fascinating. And, I keep saying to myself, how did this happen? I mean, I never dreamed that all this stuff would come to pass to me in my life. And it's still going on, and it's pretty great. So that I think that American Jews and America's Game came out in 2013. Sports Collectors Digest picked it out to be the best baseball book of the year. That was really something. I thought there were a few others that were better, but I didn't argue with them. And so that resulted in fellowship in the Mass Historical Society, and a choice and the collection of all my papers by the New England Historical Genealogical Society. Honors like that, a couple of plaques from the Hall of Fame Baseball Hall of Fame for contributions to them. As I say, a cultural history as well, with a lot of Yiddish terms that I didn't collect in a glossary, and I never knew before because I'm not that much of a practicing temple-going Jew. But I thought that they should be in the text rather than the glossary, so people didn't have to thumb through a big, huge book. That book you really ought to get, because people tell me it's really interesting. You can get it over at the Booksmith. American Jews and America's Game, 2013, has 550 pages, 80-odd illustrations that I dug up, some from the recesses of the Hall of Fame. So it was really a fascinating book to do. And so let me tell you about a few of the people in that book. Hank Greenberg, I mentioned, when the Nazis were there, and Father Coughlin was spewing his nasty stuff, and Henry Ford was republishing the Protocols of Zion, all this unfair stuff that's gone on for centuries about Jews who've made major contributions to life for 3,000 years. He was, and the Jews were, a lot of anti-Semitism in the country, open anti-Semitism. Lindbergh going to play footsie with Goering, stuff like that. So that along comes this 6'4" guy, a very handsome guy, and hits 58 home runs, one of the leading sluggers of the 30s, along with Jimmy Foxx and Joe DiMaggio and Lou Gehrig. I mean, this is within I saw him play, but a lot of people haven't reached my age, so they never have. He was an unbelievable guy. Tried to join the Army 3 times, twice before Pearl Harbor, and they wouldn't take him because of flat feet. Finally got in there, and before the war, missed the 1942 season because he was there, and he rose through the ranks to become a captain. Came back in 1945 to lead the Tigers to a pennant and a World Series victory in the half season that he played. Went on to the management side of baseball, but then amazingly crossed the line to testify for Kurt Flood in that suit that ultimately led to free agency under Marvin Miller. So that he was a guy that not only showed that Jews weren't all cerebral types, that there were plenty of great athletes among them, but a guy of real character and strength. And so was Sandy Koufax, who came along later. And Sandy was a strong guy, and they're the 2 greatest Jewish players of baseball history, because Sandy, as you will recall, was a pitcher in the same class with a guy like Pedro Martinez. So that they're at their peak, their stats are unbelievable. I mean, you watch Pedro Martinez. I mean, when he was right, they could hardly hit him. I mean, he was so good. And that's the same way that Koufax was once he learned to control his fastball. That's a story in itself. And he did a great thing in the 1965 World Series, I think, just before arthritis stopped him at age 30, when he couldn't pitch anymore. He didn't pitch the first game because it was Yom Kippur, being respectful about that.
Yep.
But then he came back in the 5th and 6th and 7th games to pitch shutouts in both games and win the World Series for the Dodgers. And that made him an American hero, because he was a guy who really, when it was on the line, he was there with everything he had. Very strong guy, but he was reclusive, as you know, and he said to me, look, Hank started it all. I want him to be on the cover. I don't want to be on the cover. So Hank Greenberg was on the cover of that book, as I showed you, even though the publisher would have preferred to have Sandy Koufax, but Sandy Koufax wouldn't. But he said to me afterwards, now you can publish that picture that you found in the recesses of the Hall of Fame. It was a drawing of Sandy, a wonderful drawing. And my great production manager at the publisher managed to get it in the book as a second frontispiece without changing the whole layout of the book at the last minute. So anyway, and also Marvin Miller was an unbelievable guy. You know, that name may not strike you. He just now, since he died a few years ago at 95, has been admitted to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Then there was, try and make a few words about each of them. Some of them have local connotations. Al Rosen was a great player for Cleveland. He was almost the Triple Crown winner and the first unanimous MVP in 1956, I think it was. And Marty Abramovich, who lives over here in Newton, you've probably heard of him, the baseball card guy. He had decided that he wanted to assemble a set of the 150 or so Jewish major leaguers, and he did, to great acclaim. Saul Gittleman, who's a professor and a professor emeritus and a university professor for many years at Tufts University, is in the book. And that's another story like Elias's. His mother and father came over, and so he's a first generation American, and he rose from the tough streets of Hoboken, where Frank Sinatra comes from, to become a university professor, even though he played a few days in the minor leagues until they told him, Saul, I don't think you're going to make this. You're not going to be a major leaguer. There's a guy named Brad Osmus, was a great catcher in the major leagues. I prophesied in the article I wrote about him in that book, American Jews, that he'd become a manager, which he did, and he will be a manager again. His mother and father, his grandmother and grandfather lived in Brookline, and Jacques Dronczyk, who was a terrific school committee man for many years. So Brad, his mother, would take him to Brookline. So Brad would come here to Brookline, and then now I have a place on Cape Cod, and I asked him to speak down there, and he came he didn't get an agent, didn't ask for money. He came of his own. My wife fell in love with him because he's such a handsome guy. He was a great catcher, had the highest fielding percentage of a catcher in baseball history. Not a big batter, but a very sincere guy, and he has that local history. I wrote some about Alan Dershowitz before Alan became persona non grata in the more left wing community. Alan and I used to call games for the Sharks down at the Woodbat League down in Martha's Vineyard. And one time I said to him, he wanted to do the play-by-play. So I said, okay, you do the play-by-play, Alan, but I'll ask you any question that comes into my mind. So I did. And in the sixth inning, I said, what's the worst experience you ever had? Something that didn't turn out so well. He didn't answer the question, and he answered everything else. So 2 innings later, I said, Alan, you never answered that question. What about it? So he finally answered the question. You know, Alan's a brilliant guy. I'm not sure what's motivating him these days. He was always very nice to me. He spoke, I guess you'd say he moderated the program when I spoke at the 92nd Street Y, which was very well attended. And, you know, he's a good speaker. I thought his argument during the impeachment proceeding was not up to his usual high legal standards because it was a spacious argument. But hey, you know, I can only go on my personal experience, which was a plus. And we hope he moderates some of his views. And then there's Ian Kinsler, who played for the Red Sox for a little while. He was 500th as a draft pick, and everybody said, Ian Kinsler, I mean, my God, he'll never play ball. Well, he had a fabulous major league career. He was making $15 million a year. He was a great leadoff man. He may not make the Hall of Fame, but close. And he's a very, you know, I said to him, Ian, a very respectful guy. When they called him in from the third base dugout where I was doing the interview, I asked for 2 more minutes, but he went because he loved his coaches, loved his managers, and despite all the money he was making, he remained a regular guy, and that's always the way Ian has been. When I pointed out to the red seat in the bleachers where Ted Williams hit a home run that was 500 odd feet that I saw in 1946, the first year after the war, I was sitting in the center field bleacher, an unbelievable hit that was like a high line drive that just kept going. A lot of people say, were you there? Yeah, I was there. Nobody believes that. And Ian certainly didn't, because I said, that's where Ted Williams hit it. I saw it. So, so he said, nobody could hit a ball that far. So I said, well, you know, there was a west wind that day, but still, I mean, that's a fantastic distance. But he says, must have been a hurricane. So, so I said to that was before I switched on the voice recorder, and I said to myself, hey, this guy is not only a great player, and he was in the midst of a great streak right then. I said, but he got a sense of humor. So I flipped it, and we talked, and sure enough, he hit a home run that day, and he carried on his hitting streak, a remarkable hitting streak, lots of homers and triples and fielding plays, right into the World Series, which they, you might recall, lost on the last day. And then the last one I'd mentioned to you is Kevin Youkilis, who I interviewed him in the Red Sox clubhouse, and the first thing he said to me was, don't you know that you can't talk to a guy in the clubhouse when he's eating? I said, oh, I'm sorry. I'll come back to you. So I turned around, and there was Manny Ramirez. So I said to Manny, I said, yeah, you know, don't, this press thing, I'm not here to get a scoop. I'm just here to interview a couple of people for a book. Oh, yeah, book? What's the book about? Jews and baseball. Jews and baseball. So that Manny was one of my favorites because he was really a great, great batsman and, you know, an eccentric character, but a great batter. And who was sitting on the other side? Craig Breslow. And the Sox released him 3 days later. I got a story on him in there. And Craig, you know, graduated from Yale in one of those esoteric type courses that you know, nobody can understand. He could have become a doctor at NYU, put him over 3 times because he was still playing baseball. And he, you know, when you ask some of these guys who had other lives that they could have followed, what would you rather do, be a famous doctor or a baseball player? They always say baseball player. Why? Because, you know, as Craig told me, I'm out there in the sun every day. There's Manny Ramirez over here and great player over here. I mean, it's really fun. Well, anyway, Craig said, I think I'm a major leaguer. The Red Sox didn't. They sent him away. And what do you know? He became a major leaguer right that season for 10 years, coming back to the Red Sox and pitching very well for them 2 or 3 years ago when they played the Cardinals in the World Series. This guy graduated, I don't know, number 1 in his class. He was captain of the Yale baseball team, just like George Bush the First was, and Steve Greenberg, Hank Greenberg's son, was. So Yale University has a place here. So that he was a great guy. And then I came back to Kevin and interviewed Kevin, and he led it. His family is sort of a devout Jewish family from Cincinnati, but he was a tough kid, and he could have gone the wrong way, but he loved his parents, and they always steered him back. And he's, you know, the reason he had to retire so soon is that his body got worn out young at 33 from playing ball so much. But, you know, he was always supposed to be Youkilis, the god of walks, and really couldn't make the major leagues. And finally, he made the major league roster as the 26th man on a 25-man squad. I'm sort of joking. And ultimately turned into a home run hitter and a guy that batted in a lot of runs. And his mantra was, hard work pays off. Well, it sure did, because he's out there and he chased Tom Brady's sister hard enough to marry her. And he's got a restaurant and a beer business going out there that he's worked hard at that's going very well. So he showed us that hard work pays off, not only as a home run and RBI guy for the Red Sox, but in the rest of his life. So I think probably I've said enough. Nobody has stopped me to ask a question. Does somebody want to ask me a question?
I have a question.
Okay.
Sandy Koufax's back hurt him all his pitching career. Was it still hurting him when you interviewed him?
Oh, it was an arm problem.
Problems. They used to have to strap him in and do all kinds of things before he.
So what happened with him is that he developed an arthritic elbow, not back. And you're talking about his physical problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Actually, he started out his major league career pitching a brilliant game here and a bad game there because he was wild. And Norm Sherry, who was his battery mate, there was a spring training game, and Norm Sherry's in the book too. And Norm was, just a garden variety catcher for the Dodgers, but he a Jewish guy, and but one of those guys that had a weazened face like you think of an old major leaguer, and because they're out in the sun so much, and they went off to play a spring training game away from their home field, and they had a limited squad and limited pitching, and Koufax started off by walking the bases loaded, so Norm goes out to him and he says, you're so fast. Let's take a little off it so you can throw it a little straighter, and these guys won't hit you. And Koufax was a stubborn guy. He wanted to throw his fastball as fast as he could. But he did follow Norm's advice that day, and it went very well. Well, lo and behold, he started pitching that way. And I think in that first season that he started, that was after 4 or 5 major league seasons. So he's like 25 at that time. And so when he started pitching that way, I think his record that year was 18-13, and then the next year was like, numbers like 29-5, and the next year 28-7. I mean, it was unbeatable. And so then he had these 5 great seasons, like Pedro did. But then the arthritic elbow was such that he could still pitch with it, but he was told that if he kept that way, kept pitching, he would lose the use of his left arm. And he used to have to bathe it and do all sorts of things to keep pitching. And he made the decision, quite intelligently, that rather than crippling himself, he would retire. So he retired. So if he had had a full career, he would have won 300 games. As it was, he was, a first ballot entry to the Hall of Fame. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
More or less, yeah.
I think Phil Sandler had a question too.
So what was the connection between Alan Dershowitz and baseball? And did he ever tell you what he acknowledged was the worst experience of his life?
Well, as far as the connection to baseball is concerned, he was a great baseball fan. And my concept of who I wanted to have in this book kept expanding. As a matter of fact, when Kirkus interviewed the book, when it first came out, there were about 28 reviews. But Kirkus, is always the first one with a short review, but everybody looks for that. And they called me a number of things, charming, inquisitive, eccentric, odd, and they loved the book. Everybody was calling me the next day to say, what a great review. And when I saw all those adjectives, idiosyncratic, I said to myself, that's me. So I think that, and the Kirkus review remarked, Alan Dershowitz and some of the other people that were in it, why? Well, just because he was a great baseball fan when he was a kid in Brooklyn. In those days, everybody thought of him as dumb Alan. Locked himself in a freezer in the delicatessen that he worked in. Didn't get such great grades. Was a pain in the rear end to his teachers. He would keep his glove in his desk. He and his brother would play catch every morning. He thought he was going to take over for Pee Wee Reese as the Dodgers shortstop. And it wasn't until he went to Brooklyn College, which he got a scholarship to, or entry to, by the skin of his teeth, that suddenly he discovered that he had a mind that took him very quickly through Brooklyn College to Yale Law School to become the youngest tenured professor in Harvard's history and to become the brilliant lawyer that he was, defending all sorts of people from O.J. Simpson and Klaus Van Bülow and so forth and so on. But the reason that and when I walked into his office to interview him, he had this big thing on the wall of Jackie Robinson. This was huge. And Jackie Robinson was his hero when he was young. And I saw Jackie Robinson play when he was with the Dodgers. He was incredible. And so, Alan told me why he was on the wall, because he admired him so much. And our meeting, I knew him vaguely before that, but then we got to know each other better. And as we got to know each other better, then our friendship blossomed. But I, like everybody else, have been amazed a little at what's happened lately. And I'm at a loss to understand it, except that Alan likes the bright lights and maybe he missed them. Who knows? I mean, but he's certainly not all bad. And
It is 1 o'clock and officially the meeting adjourns, but I would like to thank you, Larry, for a very entertaining talk. You certainly got us off first base. We appreciate it greatly.
gee, you let me talk about 40 minutes, my God.
You did great. Thanks.
I was happy to do it. I want to thank you for inviting me. I want to thank Elias for giving me that opportunity. And it was interesting to sit in on your meeting about all the things that Rotary does. And I'm also that new fellow that lives on Brington Road. I want to welcome him to Brookline, because I don't know how he got here, but he picked a very interesting community to live in, because there were so many people that from Brookline that are distinguished. A lot of them here in Voices of Brookline, Nobel Prize winners, and on and on. So enjoy yourself here.
Thanks. A real quickie, I had to step away. I don't know if you covered it, but apropos Jews, baseball, Brookline, and Yale, there's Theo Epstein.
Well, I'll tell you a little about Theo Epstein, as long as you want to ask me about that. Theo, unlike his brother, was social worker at Brookline High School and began that.
I've known the family for 25 years anyway. Yeah,
they're great. And, you mentioned the Kennedys. I mean, when Voices of Brookline came out, I sent Ted Kennedy a copy.
I don't know, different Kennedys. I'm talking about Sam.
Yeah, I know that, yeah.
Okay.
So that, but Ted Kennedy wrote me one of probably the most touching mail I ever got. He said, very brief, he said, I just read Voices of Brookline that you sent me. I only wish Jack had been here to read it too. And that was really nice. So that, so that when it comes to Theo Epstein, he's unlike his brother. They're twin brothers, they're very close, but he's sort of a cool, little bit withdrawn, but obviously extremely talented. I mean, if Branch Rickey was the greatest general manager in baseball history until Theo, I think now takes that mantle, because he's going to go to the Hall of Fame for sure, bringing championships to the Red Sox and to the Cubs. So he's great. But anyway, when I interviewed him when he was the general manager of the Red Sox down at spring training in Fort Myers, he had it set up, and I figured he'd have it set up, because knowing him, because it wasn't easy to get the interview in the first place, that it would be short. So we start, and maybe 5 minutes into it, there's a knock on the door. Not that I didn't think there was going to be a knock on the door. And his secretary steps in and says, "They want you down on the field, Theo." Well, in those 5 minutes, I knew that at the beginning, I'd have to catch his interest by what I would ask him. And that happens. So he waved her off, and he said, "Well, I'm going to stay here with Larry for a little while." And so he stayed with me for about a half an hour. I got a very interesting interview from him. And as you say, you've known his family for a long time, and very interesting family, because I think his grandfather and granduncle wrote the screenplay for Casablanca, maybe the most famous movie of all time. His father, who's a professor of writing over at BU, has written several books, and so they're an unbelievable family. And his brother is making great strides in the work he does here in Brookline.
Sorry, medical appointment, got to go. Thank you very much, Larry. This was just more fun than a barrel of monkeys.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate what you say.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, I'm looking at your great face.
Thanks.
Same smile.
Thanks.
Well, meeting adjourned. Thank you, Larry, very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Larry.
Good night.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay,
Larry.
goodbye. I'm switching off.
Hi, Joe.